This is Nalini Haynes, and Dark Magazine is putting Rajith Savanadasa in the limelight today. Rajith was born in Sri Lanka and now lives in Melbourne. He turned to creative writing in the final year of an engineering degree, then completed the professional writing and editing course at RMIT. He was shortlisted for the Asia Europe Foundation Short Story Prize in 2013, the Fish Publishing Short Story Prize in 2013. He received a Wheeler Centre Hot Desk Fellowship in 2014 and was part of the QWC Hachette Manuscript Development Program in 2014. Ruins is his debut novel. Rajith is also the founder and primary contributor to Open City Stories, a website documenting the lives of a group of asylum seekers in Melbourne. Welcome, Rajith.
Thank you.
Now, you've just had your debut novel published. Tell us about Ruins.
Sure. So it's actually about to be published. 28th of June is the official release date.
Oh, sorry about that. I sometimes I forget because I have my copy and I've already read it.
Yes. It does feel like it's already out there because I've seen the final copy as well, and it's been quite a long time in the works now. Ruins is set in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, mainly in Colombo, and in 2009, which is when the civil war over there ended, and it follows a family. So there's a chapter from the perspective of every single family member, including the servant. So it plays with the idea of what family might mean to you, how far those bonds of family can be stretched. And there's also a structure that I've used, which is based on an ancient artifact called the Moonstone. So the Moonstone supposedly shows the path to Nirvana, and there are it's a semicircle with animals going around it and a lotus flower at the center. And that's also another idea that I explore through the novel.
Yes, you use literary techniques to explore relationships and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually expected a story about people who emigrated. Why didn't you go down that path?
I'd been trying to write a Sri Lankan story for quite a while because since leaving Sri Lanka, which was around 15 years ago, I felt like I've had a lot to say about the country, especially since I feel like I've gained quite a bit of perspective living outside that culture, living far away from the people. I felt like, there's a lot that I have to say about it, and a novel was just the best way to do it. And I'm working on a second novel that is probably going to be about migration.
With some of the same characters or with new characters?
Completely new novel.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. Now, you came to Australia as an adult. So until 2001, you were immersed in a culture that I assume showed people like you in literature and on TV. Then you moved. What was it like to no longer see yourself or to rarely see yourself in storytelling?
It was unusual. So there was Sri Lankan TV as well. So you would get the Sri Lankan culture, which is very close to what Indian culture is a bit like. So very kind of movies were quite melodramatic, lots of dance sequences, and they weren't exactly what I enjoyed watching. But there was also quite a lot of American culture, especially. So all the Hollywood movies were the sorts of things that we watched growing up. The Hollywood movies, the sitcoms that you got from America. And, it comes to a point where you feel like, you're not very visible. Or I was actually at a point when I wished, there were times when I wished I was American for some reason, and that's kind of what happens to kids when they grow up not seeing themselves represented up on the screen.
Mm.
And I think books are a little bit different, where you do get quite a lot of Indian writers writing about, or subcontinental writers that do have a bit of a presence in the global scene, which is good. And someone like Arundhati Roy, who I read when I was fairly young was a huge influence in wanting in me setting down this path.
Okay, so what you're talking about how there were times where you wished you were American, and you think that kind of envy, would you call it envy?
Um, yeah, I would call it envy. Yes. It was a sense of, every hero seems to be American and they seem to be the center of the world and doing all these cool things. And I almost felt like, I was part of that when why wasn't I recognized? Um, and, that there'd almost been some kind of mistake. I mean, it wasn't so, I probably didn't think these things very consciously, but it was always there.
Yeah. So, do you think you felt invisible?
Yes, to a degree. Yeah, I definitely felt, and it was more so once I came over to Australia that I felt more invisible. And a good example is having to explain my name to you. Sri Lankan or Indian names aren't particularly well known, and just going to get a coffee and having to repeat my name a number of times that can be quite daunting, and it's much easier to give a Western name to say Jim or Bob or something like that, and I know people who do it.
Yes. Well, I'm aware that my name is Indian and Sri Lankan, and I deliberately pronounce it incorrectly because if I try to pronounce it correctly, Australians end up calling me Nalini, and I hate that so much. Yeah. So
Where does it come from? Is it Indian?
yes, yes. I was kind of digression here, but I was born in Malaysia. My parents had expected a boy, so they had no girls' names picked out. And so I was nameless. And they had two friends. One was Malay Indian and one was Malay Chinese. And they each wrote a list of names. And so my first name is Indian and my second name is Chinese.
Wow.
Yes, I have a multicultural background, even though I'm very, very white. So, what effect does equity and representation have? So, this is the opposite of being invisible.
Mhm. I think, well, not quite knowing what it's like, making a few assumptions that and I think we are walking towards it in some way slowly. Um, it feels comfortable. Like I have a workplace that's quite diverse. Uh,
Well, you're in Melbourne, aren't you?
I'm in Melbourne. Yes.
It's the
Yeah.
multicultural capital of Australia.
Yes. And in my workplace, I have quite a large team. My boss is a lady. Lots of there's lots of cultures represented. There's Indian guys. There's Malaysians. There's yeah, and we also come from, we have a very diverse skill set as well. So I work within a team of copywriters and user experience designers. So, some of us, there's a guy who surfs and plays music, and there's, a lady who teaches yoga. And so it's a really great environment and everyone feels comfortable. We feel we're happy to contribute and help each other out. And yeah, it's just nice.
That sounds fantastic. So, it doesn't sound like you're working as an engineer. It sounds like you're working as a writer or an editor.
Um, Yeah, so I've been working so it's still in the telecommunications field. So I'm almost a technical writer. I've moved further away from the technical aspects to towards focusing more on on customers, on humans. And so yeah, this is where I am now, and I'm happy here.
So, you're blending the engineering with the writing to do technical writing.
Yes, that would be.
You've started a website that showcases immigrant stories or asylum seeker stories. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there was a time when I had written two drafts of a novel, and I was feeling like it wasn't getting anywhere. I sent it to friends, and they were saying it wasn't quite working, that I probably needed, another draft, and I was feeling like I didn't have it in me. And I felt like I needed to do something meaningful with my time. So there was a small group of there's an organization called the Darabin Ethnic Communities Council up in Preston, which is a suburb of Melbourne within Victoria. Um, Went along, and there was a man who introduced me to a group of asylum seekers. So they had a service where they had a room for where asylum seekers could drop in and get any kind of help they wanted. So if they wanted help finding a house, or if they needed things to fill the house with, they needed furniture and bedding, these people helped however they could. And also, just simple things like filling out forms or trying to find a doctor or anything. So I spent a bit of time within the welcome room, just chatting with people, and but I also had this specific idea that I would like to talk about or use it as a time for telling stories or talking about their histories and what they faced. Um, but then as this continued, it evolved to me recording their conversations because I felt like what I was getting was very important and that I needed to share it. But to also not limit it to what happened to these people in their own countries or in the past, but to just talk about their everyday lives because I feel like they're not very different from us, but they're going through these very difficult but also quite interesting situations. Um, for example, there's a lady who came over and tried to live with her cousin, but the cousin treated her like a servant. So just tried to get her to clean the house or look after the baby, and she felt really uncomfortable. And she also felt judged because she was a very engaged person and she would go out and help in the community. And they didn't like her going out at night or coming back a little bit later after, one of the things that that Ethnic Communities Council do is also have events occasionally. So you'd go along to an event, and she would maybe be a little bit late, around 7:30 or 8, and the cousin would be completely judgmental about that. So she felt uncomfortable, and eventually left the house and found this other house where an older gentleman had opened his wife had died recently, and his kids were all grown up, and he had this large house that was empty, so he opened it up to asylum seekers. And so there were a couple of African ladies living there, and this Iranian lady, and they were all really happy. They would cook for each other and gather around and just enjoy themselves.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
So were you helping them write their stories, or were you ghostwriting their stories? What were you doing?
It's an interview format that I have. So I basically go over to their houses, and we just have a little conversation over a cup of tea, and then I take my recordings back and I transcribe them. It's quite a time-consuming process, which is why I haven't been able to do it in a while. But I hope to get back to it at some point.
Yes, transcribing takes ages, and then rewriting too.
Yes, yeah. And then, I do massage it a little bit to figure out, what's the main thrust of the story.
Mm.
And naturally some things get cut out and others left in. But it was also a very informative process in terms of writing novels as well, listening to people think and listening to people, speak, and figuring out which parts of these stories they were telling me actually affected me.
Mm.
So I think that contributed quite a bit in how I went on to write that third draft that became Ruins.
Oh, that's great. Was the servants' experiences and the wife's experiences with people asking her for help finding missing relatives, is that kind of where some of that came from?
It was only the servants' experiences that are rooted in reality. So my parents have a servant or a lady who works for them and still does. She's been with them for over 30 years, probably around 40 years. And she has a very similar story to Lata, that Lata character in the book. She left her village and came to Colombo and just helped out with little things at first because she was quite young, and then slowly took over the responsibility of running the whole household and brought up my sister and I. And she was like a second mum to us. But I've also, ever since I left Sri Lanka, I've felt a little bit of guilt as well in terms of how I treated her, and because we naturally, like, we didn't even think of her as a um, like, while we say she's not treated as a servant, we really did treat her differently.
Mm.
And while we didn't see that as a problem living there, I can see that now.
Yes.
Uh, and that was one of the reasons I used her as a major character in the book. But I have to say, everyone else is not necessarily like, people always assume that all the characters are based on real people or based on my family, but they're not. Some of the experiences are personal, like some of the things Anushka goes through, like listening to music secretly. That's probably me. um, and other things are just, just observations, really. And I've tried to use Sri Lankan archetypes rather than use specific characteristics, because I feel like Sri Lankans and anyone, people in general don't take responsibility for the wider political things happening in the world, and Sri Lankans tend to think that politics is very separate from them, and I tried to show that it's actually not, and it does have an effect on people, and all those things have an effect on the individual.
Mm. Having said that, um, the political situation in Australia is interesting, shall we say. Um, how do you think individuals could affect the political situation with regards to immigrants and refugees, and improve things so we don't have, civil war?
Mhm. I think on a very personal level, there's changes that we can make, like the things that we talked about, like appreciating other cultures. Like, I think we have a very monocultural approach to the way we consume things. Hollywood movies are the best, or certain books are the best, and we only consume those things. And I think we need to start looking at other cultures. Like, Iranian cinema is pretty amazing. If you've ever had a chance um, to watch an Iranian movie, there's some great filmmakers. And I think books are also a really great way to learn about other cultures, and figure out that we're actually not much different from each other. Um, I mean, there are things that people do, like rallies, and I think they're effective to a degree, but I also think they put certain people offside, and I think it's probably better to take the subtler approach, and just engage and um, yeah, engage with different cultures and different people, and make the changes on a personal level. And I think then everything, and there will be a flow-on effect from that. And it feels like a long game to play, but I think that's the best way to do it.
That sounds quite wise. Now, you also write about music.
I I used to. Can't say I do that anymore. I still listen to quite a lot of music, but no, I haven't had a chance to write about much else.
So you've been very busy with your novel.
I have been very busy with the novel, and my partner and I have had a baby, so she's 9 months old. Yeah.
Takes up a little bit of your time and energy. um, who are your favourite storytellers? Mate, they can be in any medium.
Um, yeah. So in terms of books, I've mentioned Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things. Then I had a massive phase where all I read was things like David Foster Wallace's work. And then moved on to like Ben Lerner, whose books I'm enjoying quite a bit now. Ali Smith is really great too. In terms of TV, I think we're in a really interesting time for long form television. The Wire is one of my favorite shows ever. I keep rewatching it, and my partner's like, "You need to get away from The Wire," and I keep quoting The Wire as well. And whenever I see an actor who's from The Wire, I'd be like, "Oh, that's Stringer Bell," and she's like just rolling her eyes at me. But also Breaking Bad was pretty great. There's the guy who made Breaking Bad's also made a spin-off called Better Call Saul, which I'm watching right now, which is very enjoyable. And in terms of music, I think musicians are pretty good storytellers too. There's the Mountain Goats. He's just a guy with a guitar, John Daniel, and every song is like a little short story. And I find them all very, very moving. And especially there's one album that he made about growing up with his stepdad, who was quite violent, called The Sunset Tree, which is just one of my favorite albums.
Wow. Do you have any other musicians that you'd recommend for storytelling other than Mountain Goats?
Mountain Goats is one. Vic Chestnut is another one who tells stories, and his story is quite. I tend to gravitate towards these dark themes, but Vic
I
Chestnut.
kind of gather that Breaking Bad and things like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
I don't know why, but Vic Chestnut was also a musician who talks about heavy stuff, but in a very witty and light with a light touch. He was paralyzed for most of his life, so since he was 18, he had an accident, and it's a very sad story because they didn't have a very good health insurance system in America, and he had racked up a huge debt and ended up dying a few years ago. And all of his songs, because he knows death is on the way, all of his songs deal with that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's another one. There's another uplifting moment for you.
Well, these stories need to be told, though. This morning I read a really interesting article that was, yes, I Am Not Your Plot Device by Stephen Spon, and it's talking about the movie Me Before You, which is it's a romance, but because one of the people is a quadriplegic, it's got to end in tragedy with him going into assisted suicide, and that's so romantic and it's so appropriate because he's disabled, so let's go and take him off and kill him. You know, can't have the happy ending at the end. It's like this kind of thing. These stories need to be told, not the Me Before You, but the Stephen Spon saying, yeah, I'm in a wheelchair. Don't tell me that I need to go and kill myself. Let's tell other stories. And
Yeah.
I think it's really important that these stories are told.
And it has to come from the right place, doesn't it? It has to come from the people who are going through it with the accurate details about what they're actually going through.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, and I think this is why you've got such a strong voice, and the fact that you've talked to these other people who are asylum seekers, refugees, and you've heard their stories. And I think it's really, I mean, I haven't read any of your previous work, but I think you've got a really strong voice. And although it's set in Sri Lanka, so in a way it's divorced from Australia, I think that there is so much in your book that actually speaks to us, including, including your comments about the missing relative who may have hopped on a boat to go to Australia. That's, in no way are you saying that this is right or this is wrong, or you're saying this is why. And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, that's what I tried to do. I think that the problem I had with some of the previous drafts was that I was trying to say something, and I was trying to embed a message in the story. And with this one, with the final draft, I just gave up on trying to, trying to say something, and just tried to represent the characters for who they were.
Yeah, it's a story about this is how it is, and this is who these people are. Yeah, I think it has a lot of potential to reach a larger audience because it's not message driven.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what next for you? You've said that you're writing another novel that's going to be based on new characters and might involve immigration in some form. What else is coming out?
That's all I can do at the moment, especially with with the baby and with all there's quite a bit of promotional work that I'm doing for this one.
Well, tell us about the promotional work.
So I'm doing a few interviews. I have a launch coming up on the 30th of June.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also doing a little talk at the Eltham Bookstore on the 29th. I've got a few festivals lined up. I've got Brisbane, Byron Bay, Melbourne Writers Festival, the Emerging Writers Festival very soon. So yeah, there's quite a uh, bit of promotional stuff that's happening. And I am trying to write the next one as well. I'm just trying to knuckle down and get a few words on the page after the baby goes to sleep. And the story is essentially, I think it will be about an asylum seeker.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing with the idea of the fact that they have to prove that they're fearful and they're afraid of going back to and I'm writing about Sri Lanka, and so this person is afraid of going back to Sri Lanka, but he's also not sure if he is. So he's got to prove to himself and to the authorities that he is afraid, and that's not an easy thing to do. Um, and I've gone to a couple of sessions at the community court to just listen to appeals and things like that, just to get a sense of what it's like. And it is pretty fascinating because quite a lot of those appeals focus on the language and how interpretation might have changed how the judge or whoever was listening at the hearing would have taken this in. So often that's what's challenged.
So it becomes a semantic argument and an argument about interpretation, which is very difficult when someone's speaking English as a second language. Because, I mean, your English is amazing. Most Australians, well, I myself speak a few words of a few different other languages, but I couldn't hold a 5-minute conversation in any of them. Um, Most Australians don't speak a second language, and yet immigrants are coming here, refugees are coming here, and they're having to justify themselves in English.
So all the forms are in English, and the ones I've been in, they didn't even have legal representation. It was just an asylum seeker with an interpreter trying to defend himself, um, which was kind of heartbreaking to see because he was a little bit powerless in terms of what he could do. Um, and the fact is that there is less funding for legal aid for asylum seekers. I don't think they get funded at all right now. Um, so I think that probably has to do with money as well. So these guys come over and they probably don't have much money to represent to find a lawyer, and all the services like the ASRC are inundated with these cases. So they can't really send a lawyer for each of these cases. So they have to pick and choose.
So, how do they choose? Do they choose the most desperate or the most likely?
They either choose the most desperate or the ones that they feel really do need a lawyer or actually have a chance of winning. Uh, the ones that I saw were it's hard to say. I don't know what the final what the results were, what the decision was. Um, but they seemed like the cases that were not necessarily hopeless, but it was, this is the best case scenario for you. Try doing this, and we'll give you all the advice we can, but we can't represent you. And so they've done a rundown of what items in the first the presentation, the story that they've presented that could be challenged. And so that was what was brought up at court. And this particular asylum seeker kept trying to retell his story, but the judge had to keep stopping him and saying, "No, we're not talking about your story. We're just talking about what was said during your hearing," and that's what's up for discussion here.
Yeah, so if he doesn't get the story out the first time, he doesn't get to add it to the second.
No.
Oh dear. Yeah, I can understand that's how the legal system would work. I think it's a bit tragic. Well, kind of digressed a bit here. So, are you going to be appearing at the Melbourne Writers Festival? I think you said you're going to be at the Brisbane Writers Festival.
Yes, and Melbourne as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well we can look out for you then. And what's the date? Yes, this interview may be up before your book launch. So, would you like to give us the details?
Sure. So the details of the launch?
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be at Readings in Carlton
Yes.
on the 30th of June at 6:45 sorry, 6:15.
6:15.
Yeah, 6:15 p.m.
Okay. And do people need to RSVP to readings and let them know?
I know Hachette have sent out an invite with RSVPs, but it's a free event that Readings has advertised, so I think they can just turn up as well.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the launch of your new book, and thank you very much for talking to Dark Magazine.
Thanks very much.